work, and I think we really need to understand. No, I'm not doing a. I just want to know. It just doesn't make common sense. It's a common sense approach. I want to know
I think we've got to
why
trust the
they
police
took
to do their job. Really.
Well, let's have transparency about it. You and I believe in transparency.
I want to pick up on one of the points that Margaret Hodge made there, and I am going to come back to Keir Starmer before we go, Margaret. But just to follow on from the point you raised, Margaret. Point 5 in the conclusions, I found that some staff had witnessed or been subjected to behaviours at work which they felt concerned about, but at times felt unable to raise properly. This is really horrible, I think, and it suggests a sense of entitlement. I was made aware of multiple examples of a lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff. That's just horrible.
It is horrible.
It's like they were pulled up on their behaviour by very junior members of staff, support staff, if you like, and they basically said, what do you mean?
Well, to take Margaret's point, I would like to see that those instances clearly set out, so exactly what she means by that, who it was, and I think it does refer in the report and the conclusions to disciplinary action. If people have treated other members of staff like that, the grievances process, their employment processes, disciplinary action should be taken against individuals like that. It's clearly unacceptable. But we don't know who that was. I mean, to imply that was the Prime Minister, for example.
Give me time, Kevin.
Yes, exactly.
You're here. Margaret Hodge, to that point, the Prime Minister had drinks while at work. Keir Starmer had drinks while on the campaign trail. What's the difference?
Well, let's wait. You know, all I would say to you, there is a difference between having a pizza and a glass of beer in the middle of a campaigning day, and there is apparently, let's wait and see, there is apparently evidence that they went on working beyond that till 1 o'clock in the morning. There's a difference between that and clear partying and breaking of the rules. Keir Starmer is a man who has always abided by the rules, and he's done the honourable thing now. I don't think he's done it. I don't think he's taken a risk. A lot of the people have said, you know, he's taken a risk in doing this. I think it's just the man he is. He has said, if the police fine him, I will resign. Boris Johnson has been fined. I don't know why he's only been fined once. I'd like to hear from the police why he's only been fined once. I think he misled Parliament. I think he lied to Parliament. We'll see what the Privileges Committee come up with. What will it take for him to resign, Kevin? What will it take?
Something that's serious enough is to resign. So you made the point. You made the point. OK, that Keir Starmer went on working, and I accept that. And I don't think Keir Starmer should resign either. But the birthday cake event, he was there for 9 minutes and presumably went back to work after. Any Prime Minister works exceptionally hard, as you know. And this event, he was there for 10 minutes and went back to work. What is the difference? I don't think that is sufficient.
There were parties, Kevin. There were parties.
Yeah, but I know you're talking about the Prime Minister. No. Surely it should be individual responsibility.
But what the report...
Is the Prime Minister done something that's serious enough to ask him to resign? And it's a hugely high bar to do.
What the report says, if I can just say that, what the report says is that it was led from the top.
It doesn't say that. It does not say that.
Well,
it says senior leadership.
I mean, the senior leadership...
Well, who's the leadership of number 10 but the Prime Minister?
For this culture. I mean,
Let's read the report.
She's right. Now, on this Privileges Committee, because after today we're going to have a big hoo-ha in the House of Commons, I'm sure there'll be people on your side as well as, obviously, on the Labour side who will throw some metaphorical bricks at the Prime Minister. Just... because the next stage is the Privileges Committee, right? Whether he misled Parliament. Now, that has a majority Conservative, a Conservative majority on it, so the number of Tory MPs outnumber the number of opposition MPs. What a job. So the only way he would be able... I mean, you wouldn't... There, but for the grace of God, you're not in it. Would you fancy that one?
Well, I trust my colleagues. I mean, we saw the reporting into Owen Paterson from a similar committee that criticised Owen Paterson and recommended sanctions against him, of course, which ultimately did happen. And that had a majority of Conservative colleagues on it as well. So I don't see this as being any different. I trust my colleagues to do the right thing, to report fairly. And we've got to see what the outcome of that is, whether he misled Parliament or not. I mean, again, I think the difficulty in terms of this is establishing if he knowingly misled Parliament, which is an even tougher thing to decide upon. So we've got to let that committee do its work and then we react accordingly.
And Margaret Hodge, how do you demonstrate that somebody knowingly misled Parliament without, seeing inside their soul and their brain?
Well, we've seen photos of that November leaving party for Lee Kane. We've seen photographs of it. We were there. You and I don't know if you were, Kevin, but I was there.
Party, no.
No, but you were in Parliament when the Prime Minister said there was no party.
Yes.
I don't know quite what else we need. I just don't understand what else we need. And, I have a huge respect. I work very closely with a lot of Conservative MPs. That's how we do the work around dirty money and trying to get that out of our system. But the pressure that will be on all of you guys, and I recognise that, the pressure that will be on all of you guys not to tell the truth.
We are going live to the House of Commons. I wanted to talk to you for so much longer. Let's go live now for Prime Minister's question time.
I want to welcome Nick Munting and his family to the gallery. Nick has worked in Parliament for over 30 years, primarily as a sous chef, but also as an Associate Sergeant-at-Arms. Unfortunately, Nick has had to leave his role because of ill health, and he is much missed by his colleagues. I know all members, particularly the member for Croydon Central, Nick's constituency MP, will wish to join me in thanking Nick for his long service to the House and in sending good wishes to Nick and his families. I would also like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to questions to Prime Minister Anthony Brown.
Question number 1, please.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by echoing what you've just said about the reports of the fatal shooting in a Texan primary school. Our thoughts are with all those affected by this horrific attack. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I welcomed the Emir of Qatar to Downing Street. It's excellent news that Qatar announced it will invest up to £10 billion into the UK through our new strategic investment partnership. And not only will it boost local economies and support jobs, it will support our green economy and decarbonisation. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cambridge is one of the most expensive places to live in the country, but unlike many cheaper places, NHS workers in the city get no high cost of living supplement. So NHS workers in Cambridge pay higher rents than NHS workers in outer London boroughs like Redbridge and Croydon and Bexley and Barking, and yet they get paid 15% less. This makes it very difficult for the NHS in Cambridge, including Adam Brooks Hospital, to retain and recruit staff. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, work with me to make sure that NHS workers in South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge get paid fairly?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is a fantastic champion for his constituents and for Adam Brooks, and we're very proud of our NHS, and that's why we're putting record investment in, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that the independent NHS pay review body will listen carefully to what my honourable friend has just said.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my thoughts also, and I know the thoughts of the whole House, are with the families of the victims of yesterday's school shooting in Texas. 19 children have died, some as young as 7, and 2 adults believed to be teachers. It is an unspeakable tragedy, and our hearts are with the American people. Last weekend marked the anniversary of both the Manchester bombing and the murder of Lee Rigby, and we remember them this year as we do every year. And today is also the anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, a reminder that we must all tackle the racism that is still experienced by so many in our country and beyond. Mr. Speaker, the Sue Gray report was published this morning, and I look forward to discussing that during this afternoon's statement with the Prime Minister. For now, I want to focus on the cost of living affecting the whole country. Mr. Speaker, since we stood here last week and I asked the Prime Minister yet again to back Labour's plans for a windfall tax to reduce energy bills, hundreds of millions of pounds have been added to bills of families across the country, and hundreds of millions of pounds have landed in the bank accounts of energy companies. It sounds like he's finally seen sense, and the inevitable U-turn may finally have arrived. So when can people across the country expect him to use those oil and gas profits to bring down their bills?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's nothing original about a Labour plan to tax business. There's nothing remarkable. They want to tax business the whole time, every day. Labour wants to put up taxes on business. And what we're doing is we're helping people. He asks when we're going to help people. Yeah, we're helping people now, Mr. Speaker. And we're putting £22 billion into people's pockets already, cutting council tax by £150, cutting fuel duty, cutting national insurance contributions by an average of £330 for people who pay NICs. And, Mr. Speaker, how can we afford that? Because we have a strong economy, because we came out of COVID fast, Mr. Speaker, which would not have been possible if we'd listened to the party opposite.
15 tax rises, and he pretends they're a low-tax government. It's been, Mr. Speaker, it's been 4.5 months since Labour first called for a windfall tax on oil and gas profits. I've raised it week in, week out, and every week he has a new reason for not doing it. The Business Secretary has said it's bad. The Justice Secretary called it disastrous. Yeah. Even this weekend, the Health Secretary and the Northern Ireland Secretary opposed it. He ordered all of his MPs to vote against it last week. And now, surprise, surprise, he's backing it. Prime Minister, I'm told that hindsight is a wonderful thing. But, Mr. Speaker, whilst he dithered and delayed, households across the country suffered when they didn't need to. What?
Peter? Mr. Bone, a man who always wants to catch my eye is not going the best way to do so. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, whilst he dithered and delayed, households across the country suffered when they didn't need to. Exactly. What is it about the Sue Gray report that first attracted him to a U-turn this week?
Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, there is no surprise about Labour's lust. There's no surprise about Labour's lust to put up taxes. There's nothing original about his thought. They get off on it. They absolutely love to confiscate other people's assets. What we prefer to do, Mr. Speaker, is make sure that we have the measures that are in place to drive investment in our country and drive jobs. And it's thanks to the steps that we took, thanks to the fact that we came out of COVID faster than any other European country, which would not have been possible if we'd listened to him, that we now have unemployment at the listen to this. They used to care about this, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment at the lowest level since 1974. And, put that in your pipe.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I actually thought with this U-turn he might actually get his head out of the sand, but obviously not. The reality is that every day of his dithering and his delay, £53 million has been added to Britain's household bills. Whilst he's distracted trying to save his own job, the country has been counting the cost. But complacency is nothing new for this government. Back in October, the Chancellor delivered a mini-budget that has to be reread to be believed. With inflation already climbing, he said that he understood people were concerned about it and the government was ready to act. Since then, inflation has risen to a 40-year high, the highest rate of any G7 country. If the government was so ready to act 6 months ago, why hasn't it?
But, Mr. Speaker, the government has acted, and my honourable friend, the Chancellor, continues to act. This is the government that not only put in the living wage, Mr. Speaker. It was a Conservative institution, but we've now raised it by a record amount. We've raised it by £1,000, Mr. Speaker, a record amount. We've helped families on universal credit have another £1,000, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the measures, the £9.1 billion we've already put in to support people's costs of heating. We're abating the costs of fuel for people up and down the country, and of course we're going to do more, Mr. Mr. Speaker. We're going to put our arms around the people of this country, just as we did throughout the COVID pandemic. But the reason we can do that is because we took the tough decisions to drive the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, which wouldn't have been possible if you listened to him, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we have, and let me take another statistic, youth unemployment. They used to care about it. Youth unemployment at or near a record low.
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just the Chancellor back in September. The Prime Minister called fears about inflation unfounded. He was the last person to spot the cost of living crisis, just as he's the last person to back Labour's plan to help people through it. And, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just on inflation that they got it badly wrong. In the same speech, the Chancellor boasted about growth. Prime Minister does today. How we were going to do better than all our major competitors. It was obvious that he was being complacent. And lo and behold, Britain is set to have the lowest growth of any major country except Russia. Despite our brilliant businesses and all we have to offer, why has his government inflicted on Britain the twin-headed hydra of the highest inflation and the lowest growth?
Mr. Speaker, he loves running this country down. How many times did he come to this place? How many times did he come to this place and say that the United Kingdom had the highest COVID death rate in Europe? How many times? He was proved completely wrong. Did he ever apologise, Mr. Speaker? Absolutely not. Did he ever take it back? Absolutely not, Mr. Speaker. Actually, because of the steps we took, last year we had the fastest growth in the G7, and we will return to the fastest growth by 2024, 2025, thanks to the decisions that this government took, Mr. Speaker. And they don't care about getting people into jobs. They don't care. We care about the working people of this country, making sure we have a high-wage, high-skill, high-employment economy, and that's what we're delivering.
He talks about running this country down. He is running this country down. And it wasn't just complacency on Labour's windfall tax, which he's now backing. It wasn't just complacency on inflation, which is now through the roof. And it wasn't just complacency on growth, which is now spluttering along at the back of the pack. Because his Chancellor also claimed that people should keep more of the rewards of their efforts. And then he put their taxes up. So does the Prime Minister want to explain to hard-working people whose wages are running out sooner and sooner each month and who are facing astronomical bills and prices just how his 15 tax rises since taking office have helped them to keep more of their rewards in their pocket?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, what we're doing is making sure, after a huge pandemic, that we are funding our vital public services, which we can, because of the steps that we take. What we're also doing is making sure that we put more money back into people's pockets by the measures that I've outlined today, whether through cutting national insurance contributions or lifting the living wage or lifting universal credit, Mr. Speaker. But all this is made possible. Because we took the responsible and sensible steps to protect our economy throughout COVID and then to come out strongly. And he's completely wrong about this country's growth performance, Mr. Speaker. He runs it down. He was proved wrong about COVID. He's going to be proved wrong again.
Just delusional. Mr. Speaker, last week I raised the case of Phoenix Halliwell, whose kidney condition means he needs daily dialysis and whose energy bill has gone through the roof as a result. I'm glad that, as a result, government officials got in touch with Phoenix yesterday, and I hope that will result in more support for people who are vulnerable. But it shouldn't be left to Labour to turn up week after week to make him aware of the consequences of his dither and delay. So I want to raise another issue where the government is sleepwalking into disaster. With the summer holidays looming, there are reports that the Home Office already has a backlog of 500,000 passports to issue. That's potentially more than 500,000 people worrying whether they will get away this summer. So can the Prime Minister reassure people that they won't miss out on their holidays due to the failures of his Home Office?
Well, I thank you very much, but I can tell him actually that what we're doing is massively increasing the speed with which the Passport Office deliver, and to the best of my knowledge, everybody is getting their passport within 4 to 6 weeks, Mr. Speaker. But that is because we are driving the leadership of this country, and we are getting things done that would never have been possible if we'd listened to them. We got Brexit done, Mr. Speaker, when he voted 48 times. 48 times he voted to undo the will of the people. We got the vaccine rollout done when he would have kept us in the European Medicines Agency, Mr. Speaker. We were the first European country to help the Ukrainians resist Vladimir Putin. Yes. Do you think, does anybody seriously believe for a second that they would have done it?
Some are trying to boo, some are trying to cheer. The worst of it is I can't hear the Prime Minister. Come on, Prime Minister.
Let me say very plainly, does anybody seriously think for a second that the Labour Party would have done that, Mr. Speaker, when eight of the shadow front bench, including the shadow Foreign Secretary, who is mysteriously not in his place, voted recently to get rid of this country's independent nuclear deterrent? And he campaigned to put Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street, Mr. Speaker. We get on, we do the difficult things. We take the tough decisions, Mr. Speaker. Social care, we're fixing it. We deliver, they differ.
Prime Minister, we both can't be on our feet. I'm trying to help you. You've got to help me as well. And I'm sure you've got to the end because Mr. Stewart's itching to get his question. Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister gets passionate, things get done. Brexit is done. The vaccine, if they could contain themselves, the vaccine rollout done. So will my right honourable friend personally intervene so that the immunocompromised, like my constituent Scott, can get access to British wonder drug Evusheld, and then they, not next winter, not next year, but now, so that they can enjoy this summer and enjoy their freedom just like the rest of us.
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend has taken a keen interest in this for a while. Evusheld could potentially reduce the risk of infection, as he says. We've got to look at the available evidence before we can make a decision about whether it should be available. But I will make sure that the Department for Health and Social Care keep him updated on the progress we're making.
We now come to Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join others today to express my deepest sorrow at the horrific events in Texas yesterday. 19 children and 2 teachers have needlessly lost their lives. Many of us in Scotland will be remembering the tragic events that took place in Dunblane 26 years ago. The thoughts and prayers of the SNP are with the families suffering today, but also our hope that lawmakers will finally act to bring the scourge of gun violence that plagues the United States to an end. Mr. Speaker, the reports that the Prime Minister and Downing Street's law-breaking have been damning. Empty bottles littering offices, rooms so crowded people were sitting on each other's laps, and security forced to intervene because the parties were so outrageous. At the centre was the Prime Minister orchestrating it, grabbing a glass for himself in order to toast the partygoers. For 8 months, we've heard every excuse under the sun. But now we've all seen the damning photo evidence. While people stayed at home to protect the NHS, the Prime Minister was engaging in drinking and debauchery that makes a mockery of the gut-wrenching sacrifices that each and every person made. Will the Prime Minister now take the opportunity and resign?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the right honourable gentleman that much as I appreciate his advice, he'll have a further opportunity, which I'm sure he will take with his customary length to debate that matter in the course of the statement which will follow directly after PMQs.
I'm not happy. Ian Blackfield.
Matters, Mr. Speaker, but it's all a joke to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has lost the trust of the public. He has lost what little moral authority he had left. The Prime Minister has apologised many times, not because he feels any genuine remorse. He still refuses to even admit that there were parties and that he presided over them. He apologised for one simple reason: he got caught. The reality is, no apology will ever be enough for the families of people who lost loved ones, for the families who followed the rules, who stayed at home whilst their nearest and dearest to them were dying, and are now forced to look at photographs of the Prime Minister surrounded by drink, toasting to a party in the middle of a lockdown. If the Prime Minister will not accept that he must resign, then the Tory benches must act. This Prime Minister, who has broken the law and shown a cavalier attitude to the truth, cannot be allowed to remain in office. Prime Minister, time is up. Resign. Resign. Resign before this House is forced to remove him.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I would just direct him again. I think it would be to his advantage to look through the report, and then I think we should return to it after PMQs.
We now come to Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. High streets and heritage means a lot to the people. Two of the great six towns of Stoke-on-Trent. Price and Kensington Teapot Works fall into ruin, which is why I introduced my proper maintenance of land bill to increase fines on these ruinous owners. Can my right honourable friend confirm that as part of the government's planning reform, he will adopt my bill which imposes a new unlimited fine so these reckless reprobates can be held accountable? Up the veil for Saturday, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Here, Mr. Speaker. Up the veil, but on his, I want to thank him, by the way, for his campaign. I think he's entirely right, and that's why we've adopted the measures that he proposes in the bill. Those who leave properties derelict unreasonably could face an unlimited fine, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased to meet the Prime Minister last week in Royal Hillsborough in my constituency. We welcome his commitment to introduce legislation to deal with the protocol on the Irish Sea border and to protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That will take some time. In the meantime, as in the rest of the United Kingdom, hard-pressed households in Northern Ireland are suffering from the cost of living crisis. Will the Prime Minister give me an assurance that any measures that are brought forward by the Chancellor in the near future to help hard-pressed households will apply to Northern Ireland, and that the protocol will not be allowed to prevent Northern Ireland citizens receiving the support they need from the government at this time?
I thank the right honourable gentleman very much. As he knows, we have a package of measures to support families across the whole of the UK that I've detailed already to the House. I may say that I also think it would be an advantage to the people of Northern Ireland in tackling the issues that we all face across the UK if Stormont were to be restored, Mr. Speaker.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent report on levelling up the rural economy highlighted many areas where more work is needed in small rural and coastal communities to ensure they also benefit from our levelling up agenda. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need to ensure levelling up reaches into rural and coastal Devon? And will my right honourable friend meet with me and Helen Herford, our excellent candidate in Tiverton and Honiton, to agree how we can can progress our plans for Devon.
Prime Minister.
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, because my honourable friend is a fantastic advocate for Devon, for rural communities, and I will make sure that both she and Helen Herford get a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss her ideas further.
Ben Lake.
Mr. Speaker, rising fuel costs are causing serious problems for workers in car-dependent rural areas like Ceredigion, and for carers and district nurses, the situation has reached a crisis point. One carer from Ceredigion often has to travel 29 miles just to reach the first service user of the day, and travels around 1,700 miles each month. Would the Prime Minister therefore consider extending the Rural Fuel Duty Relief Scheme to areas like Ceredigion to help my constituent and many like her to continue their invaluable work?
Well, I thank him for his excellent question, and I can tell him that rural fuel duty relief is there to compensate motorists by helping retailers in some more remote rural areas where pump prices can be significantly higher. It currently operates on a geographical basis, but Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to ensure that the honourable gentleman gets a meeting with the relevant minister as fast as possible.
Stevenson.
Prime Minister. Labour and socialism has failed this country because they've followed policies which interfere too much in people's lives, over-regulate, spend too much taxpayers' money, borrow too much and raise taxes. Could the Prime Minister tell the House what policies his government are going to follow to ensure we don't have a similar fate?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right, that Labour's instinct everywhere and always is to put up tax with all its... that's what they're bragging about it today, Mr. Speaker. It's ludicrous. And what we are doing is not only cutting people's contributions under national insurance, but also helping businesses to invest with the 130% super deduction that my right honourable friend put in. And what that is doing is helping us to have a high-wage, high-skill economy with unemployment, and that's why I said this before, Mr. Speaker, at the lowest since 1974.
Jill Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Days before the election of disgraced former Conservative MP Imran Ahmad Khan, his victim warned the Conservative Party of the abuse he had suffered. Sit down, sorry.
There's still, I think, an appeal in sub judice, so if you can be careful, I just word the question.
Shockingly, they failed to act on this report and still won't explain why. That's why Rotherham child sexual exploitation survivor Sammy Woodhouse has called for an independent investigation into the failure, warning that the Conservative Party have broken the trust of victims. So, will the Prime Minister personally back those calls and launch an independent investigation into the failure to act so that victims can have confidence that his party will never again turn a blind eye to it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hear what she says and the sensitivity of the issues that she raises. I think, though, given the legal proceedings that are currently going on, I don't think it would be right to comment any further.
On Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, while the politics of politics often gets all the attention, back in the real world, millions of parents are being held back by issues with childcare schemes that have been a muddle over governments of all political colours, and I declare a quite obvious interest. The taxpayer is spending 5 to 6 billion quid a year, but we have some of the highest costs in the world during a cost of living squeeze, and Stroud parents and early years educators are really stuck with the bureaucracy. I know my right honourable friend has personally asked ministers to investigate options to reduce the cost of childcare. Will he tell us a little bit more about what we can do urgently and work with me with the think tank Onward when we do our reforms?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank her very much, and she and I talked about this. This is a subject in which I take a direct personal interest, and I think, Mr. Speaker, that there are things that we can do to make childcare more affordable. One of the issues is that not enough people take up tax-free childcare. We need to have more take-up of what is on offer. But what we can also look at, Mr. Speaker, is ways in which we can reform and improve the system.
Session left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next month marks 5 years since the horrific Grenfell fire tower, which killed 72 people. My constituency of Vauxhall has many tall buildings similar to Grenfell. In 2019, the Prime Minister rightly told this House, where the inquiry recommends government responsibility for fire safety, we will legislate accordingly. Yeah. But, Mr. Speaker, last week the government dropped the inquiry's recommendation that personal evacuation plan should be in place for disabled residents, claiming basic safety would be too expensive. Grenfell United said that this showed that cutting costs is more important than the value of human life. So will the Prime Minister urgently reverse this deeply inhumane decision and not break another promise to this House?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. If there is an issue with fire safety in a building, then extra steps should be taken and remediation should be made. And when it comes to self-evacuation, Mr. Speaker, the Home Office has launched a new consultation to support the fire safety of residents who are unable to self-evacuate. But if she has further representations to make on that point, I'll be very happy to ensure she gets a meeting with the Minister in Duluth.
Mr. Speaker, I am not a cynical sort, but I was slightly perplexed this week when the Cabinet Secretary and the Director of Government Propriety and Ethics, no less, were banned from attending my committee to give evidence which had been scheduled for 2 months. I cannot possibly think why, Mr. Speaker. But I wonder which particular subjects my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, was most concerned being raised by my committee. Was it the case of undeclared loans and donations in kind, security insights into appointments to the House of Lords, or indeed the consultation of the Propriety and Ethics units in ministerial appointments?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure him, I know he's not a cynic, he's one of nature's idealists, Mr. Speaker, and I will make sure that all relevant ministers and civil servants appear before his committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is leading a long queue of Conservatives MPs lining up to show how out of touch they are. Bills are rising, people are struggling. A quarter of people in work in Putney earn less than the London living wage. They don't need to be told how to budget better, to learn how to cook, to buy value food. They already are. When will the Prime Minister get a grip on this crisis, and when will he bring in the windfall tax?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing for the people of Putney and the people throughout this country is making sure that we invest now in protecting them, as I've said to the House and I've said repeatedly, not just with the increases in universal credit or in the living wage, in the warm homes discount, in cutting fuel bills, but also, of course, with the £330 cut in NICs, Mr. Speaker. But the reason we can do this is because we have a robust economic position in which we have strong employment. That is giving us the revenue to pay and to cushion people in this difficult time. It would not have been possible if we'd listened to the Labour Party during COVID.
Mr. McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend, tens of thousands of Huddersfield sporting fans are coming down to London. On Saturday, Huddersfield Giants are in their first Rugby League Challenge Cup final for over a decade. And on Sunday, it's Huddersfield Town in the Championship playoff final for a place in the Premier League. Will the Prime Minister, as well as wishing the best of luck to both Huddersfield teams, agree with me that the best way that Labour-run Kirklees Council can honour the sporting tradition of Huddersfield is following through with their pledge to house the new National Rugby League Museum in Huddersfield in the birthplace, the George Hotel, and not pull out of that deal as they've indicated they want to do so?
Prime Minister.
Is that the Labour Council pulling out of their deal? Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised. All I can say is I congratulate him on his campaign for a National Rugby League museum, and I urge him to take it up with the Arts Council or other relevant bodies.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the cover of the pandemic, we've seen a massive shift in wealth from the poorest to the richest. A partying PM and a law-breaking rich list chancellor have lined the pockets of their wealthy pals, whilst upwards of 175,000 of our fellow citizens have died from COVID, and they're now sitting on their hands and laughing in our faces as the cost of living crisis and fuel poverty could well leave thousands more to die of cold in their own homes. So, Mr. Speaker, when we saw pictures of the PM partying in the middle of the pandemic, was he toasting his assault on the working class? And I ask him, how on earth does he sleep at night with so much blood on his filthy, privileged hands?
Mr. Speaker, from furlough onwards, everything we have done since the pandemic began has been to get money into the pockets of the working people of this country, and those are the people, time and again, that we have prioritised. And I do not for a moment, doubt, Mr. Speaker, that things are tough. I do not doubt it for a moment, but it is our intention to get this country through it, and we will get through it very well by putting our arms around people as we can and as we will because of the fiscal firepower that we have, Mr. Speaker, but also by making sure that we continue with the high wage, high skill, high employment economy that we have. And the best thing to get money into people's pockets, Mr. Speaker, is to have a job.
Jill Mortimer.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that when the Right Honourable member opposite spins his myth of a low-tax Labour Party, he clearly needs a memory job? Because, can I just remind you all that in 2019, you all stood on a manifesto that would have inflicted the highest tax burden on the people of this country in peacetime. That's probably why there's so few of you over there.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, they campaigned to put up taxes on business to the highest level this country has ever seen. That was his ambition, Mr. Speaker, and that is what they would do again. Be in no doubt, that's what they love to do. You can feel the lust for tax rising off those benches opposite, Mr. Speaker, and that is why there's never been a Labour government that left office with unemployment lower than when they came in.
Mr. Wakefield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the head of Ofgem advised MPs that the energy cap is due to increase to £2,800 in the autumn, more than double from last year. And I know the Prime Minister has been busy drafting and redrafting his half-assed apologies rather than helping the people of Bury South. But at which work event? Thank you, Mr. But at which work event did he realise Labour's call was the right thing to do, considering he and his party voted against it last week? Is it just to save his own neck?
I couldn't either hear the question or the advice I was being given. It might be helpful I could hear both. Prime Minister, did you manage to hear it?
Very much. Well, I heard enough, Mr. Speaker, to have a rough idea of the nonsense that he was talking. And what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is not only supporting people now, but we will continue to put our arms around the people of this country as we did during the pandemic and beyond.
Can I just say, moderate language is what we normally use. I don't find it. It doesn't suit the chair, and I don't think it suits the country, so please. John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will recall I've previously raised with him the plight of 170 British council contractors who remain in Afghanistan in fear of their lives, 85 of whom are deemed to be at very high risk. I met the refugee minister last week. It was a positive meeting, but we face bureaucracy which is preventing the FCDO from cutting through that bureaucracy and helping these people now, courtesy of the ACRS scheme. Will he help us cut through that red tape and help these people? We owe them a debt of obligation, and time is running out.
Well, I thank him very, very much. I'll see what we can do to help those particular people, but I just remind the House that we've not only evacuated 15,000 people under Op Pitting, which I think was a great credit to this country, we've supported since then 4,600 more have come to this country, and we'll do what we can to help the people that he mentions.
Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jubilee Lead Academy in my constituency, working with Nottingham citizens, recently asked me to visit the school to hear about their low pay campaign. They're tired of seeing people in our community working hard but living in poverty. And now bills are rising, inflation's at 9%, and yet the government seems incapable and frankly a little disinterested in doing anything to help out. Mr. Speaker, our children can see the need for emergency action. Why can't our government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everybody in work, 30 million workers will get a tax cut in July, on top of everything that we're already doing. But that is not the end of what this government is going to do to look after people. And I've told the House before this afternoon, that we will continue to use our fiscal firepower to look after the British people through the COVID aftershocks and beyond.
Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday at 3:25, a school bus crashed into a group of school children in Llanfachronion. 3 children were airlifted to hospital, with another child and the bus driver taken by ambulance, and a 5th child was discharged at the scene. Everyone is in a stable condition. Clearly, this is a tragic accident that will stay with the community for some time. Will the Prime Minister join me, and I'm sure the whole House, in sending our love and prayers to those in hospital? And will he also praise the teaching staff of both the primary and high school, the Welsh Air Ambulance, Dyfed Powys Police, for their heroic response and their continuing response to the community?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this very, very sad incident, and I'm sure the whole House, his thoughts, Mr. Speaker, will be with those who have been affected, and I want to join him in particular in paying tribute to the emergency services, but also, of course, the teachers and the staff at the school who did so much to help.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, my constituent Robert Walker sadly died last year. He worked for MI6 and as such disclosed in confidence that he was a gay man. This confidence was breached by the HR department at the Foreign Commonwealth Office. Recently unearthed paperwork showed that this breach largely accounted for his well-being and enforced early retirement. Would the Prime Minister offer Bob's partner, Stephen Honeyman, a posthumous apology and commit to ask the Foreign Commonwealth Office for a formal response to his treatment while he worked at MI6?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by saying how grateful I am to the honourable member for raising this case, but I have to tell her I'm afraid I don't know directly about the events that she describes. What she says is very concerning. I'll make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister as soon as possible.
That ends Prime Minister's questions. For those who wish to leave. We now... Can I just say to the House, I expect moderate and temperate language. As we come to the statement, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will make a statement. I'm grateful to Sue Gray for her report today, and I want to thank her for the work that she's done. I also thank the Metropolitan Police for completing their investigation. And I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country, for the short lunchtime gathering on the 19th of June 2020 in the Cabinet Room, during which I stood at my place at the Cabinet table and for which I received a fixed penalty notice. And I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, above all, that I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch. Sue Gray's report has emphasised that it is up to the political leadership in Number 10 to take ultimate responsibility, and, of course, I do. But since these investigations have now come to an end, this is my first opportunity to set out some of the context and to explain both my understanding of what happened and also to explain what I have previously said to this House. And it's important to set out that over a period of about 600 days, gatherings on a total of 8 dates have been found to be in breach of the regulations in a building that is 5,300 metres square across 5 floors, excluding the flats. Mr. Speaker, I do think it is important because this is the first time I've had the chance I've had to set out the context. Hundreds of staff are entitled to work, and in the Cabinet Office, which has thousands of officials and now is the biggest it's been in any point in its 100-year history. And that is in itself one of the reasons why the government is now looking for change and reform. Mr. Speaker, those staff working in Downing Street were permitted to continue attending their office for the purpose of work, and the exemption under the regulations applied to their work because of the nature of their jobs reporting directly to the Prime Minister. These people were working extremely long hours, doing their best to give this country the ability to fight the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that this is no mitigation, but it is important to set out
Prime
the
Minister,
context.
please, just 1 second. Can I just appeal to the House? I expect it to be heard, and I want everybody to hear it. And I want the same respect to be shown to the Leader of the Opposition afterwards. So please, this is a very, very important statement the country wants to hear as well. Prime Minister.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to set out the context, not to mitigate or to absolve myself in any way. The exemption under which they were present in Downing Street includes those circumstances where officials and advisers were leaving the government. And it was appropriate to recognise them, to thank them for the work that they have done. Let me come to that, Mr. Speaker. I briefly attended such gatherings to thank them for their service, which I believe is one of the essential duties of leadership, and particularly important when people need to feel that their contributions have been appreciated, and to keep morale as high as possible. I'm trying to explain the reasons I was there, Mr. Speaker. And it's clear from what Sue Gray has had to say that some of these gatherings then went on far longer than was necessary. And they were clearly in breach of the rules, and they fell foul of the rules. I have to tell the House, because the House will need to know this, and again, this is not to mitigate or to extenuate, I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I have been appalled by some of the behaviour, particularly in the treatment of the security and the cleaning staff. And I would like to apologise to those members of staff. And I expect anyone who behaved in that way to apologise to them as well. And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance have been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules. But clearly this was not the case for some of those gatherings after I had left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building. So I would like to correct the record, to take this opportunity, not in any sense to absolve myself of responsibility, which I take and have always taken, but simply to explain why I spoke as I did in this House. Mr. Speaker, in response to her interim report, Sue Gray acknowledges that very significant changes have already been enacted. She writes, and I quote, "I am pleased that progress is being made in addressing the issues I raised." And she adds, "Since my update, there have been changes to the organisation and management of Downing Street and the Cabinet Office with the aim of creating clearer lines of leadership and accountability, and now these need the chance and time to bed in." Number 10 now has its own permanent secretary charged with applying the highest standards of governance. There are now easier ways for staff to voice any worries, and Sue Gray welcomes that, and I quote, "Steps have since been taken to introduce more easily accessible means by which to raise concerns electronically, in person or online, including directly with the Permanent Secretary." The entire senior management has changed. There is a new chief of staff, an elected member of this House, who also commands the status of a cabinet minister. There is a new director of communications, a new principal private secretary, and another of other key appointments in my office. I am confident with the changes and new structures that are now in place, that we are humbled by the experience, and we have learned our lesson. And I want to conclude by saying that I, Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker. And I want to conclude by saying that whatever the failings of we'll come to that. And whatever the failings of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office throughout this very difficult period, for which I take full responsibility, I continue to believe that the civil servants and advisers in question, hundreds of them, thousands of them, some of whom, Mr. Speaker, are the very people who've received fines, are good, hard-working people, motivated by the highest calling to do the very best for our country. And I will always be proud of what they achieved, including procuring essential life-saving PPE, creating the biggest testing programme in Europe, and helping to enable the development and distribution of the vaccine which got this country through the worst pandemic of a century. And now, Mr. Speaker, we must get our country through the aftershocks of COVID with every ounce of ingenuity and compassion and hard work. So I hope that today, as well as learning the lessons from Sue Gray's report, which I'm glad I commissioned, and again, I repeat I'm grateful to her. And I hope very much that now that she has reported, we will be able to move on and focus on the priorities of the British people, standing firm against Russian aggression, easing the hardship caused by the rising costs that people are facing, fulfilling our pledges to generate a high-wage, high-skill, high-employment economy that will unite and level up across the whole of our United Kingdom. That is my mission, that is our mission, that is the mission of the whole of the government, and we will work day and night to deliver it, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The door of Number 10 Downing Street is one of the great symbols of our democracy. Those who live behind it exercise great power, but they do so knowing their stay is temporary. Long after they've gone, that door and the democracy it represents will remain firm and unyielding. But Britain's constitution is fragile. It relies on members of this House and the custodians of Number 10 behaving responsibly, honestly, and in the interests of the British people. When our leaders fall short of these standards, this House has to act. For months, members opposite have asked the country to wait. First, for the police investigation, which concluded that this Prime Minister is the first in our country's history to have broken the law in office. Then they asked the country to wait for the Sue Gray report. They need wait no longer. That report lays bare the rot that under this Prime Minister has spread in Number 10, and it provides definitive proof of how those within the building treated the sacrifices of the British people with utter contempt. When the dust settles and the anger subsides, this report will stand as a monument to the hubris and the arrogance of a government that believed it was one rule for them and another rule for everyone else. The details are stark. 5 months ago, the Prime Minister told this House all guidance was completely followed in Number 10. Yet we now know he attended events on the 17th of December. At least one of those attending has received a fine for it, deeming it illegal. We know that on the 18th of December an event was held in which staff drank excessively, which others in the building described as a party, and that cleaners were left to mop up the red wine the next day. On the 20th of May, as a COVID press conference was taking place, one of his senior officials was told, "Be mindful, cameras are leaving, don't walk about waving bottles." It is now impossible to defend the Prime Minister's words to this House. This is about trust. Because during that May 20 press conference, the British public were told normal life as we know it is a long way off. But that wasn't the case in number 10. Even now, after 126 fines, they think it's everyone else's fault but theirs. They expect others to take the blame whilst they cling on. They pretend that the Prime Minister has somehow been exonerated, as if the fact that he only broke the law once is worthy of praise. The truth is, they set the bar for his conduct lower than a snake's belly. And now they expect the rest of us to congratulate him as he stumbles over it. Number 10 symbolises the principles of public life in this country: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, leadership. But who could read this report and honestly believe the Prime Minister has upheld those standards? The reason the British public have had to endure this farce was his refusal to admit the truth or do the decent thing when he was found to have broken the law. This report was necessary because of what Sue Gray describes as failures of leadership and judgment for which senior political leadership must bear responsibility. It is that failure of leadership that has now left his government paralysed in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The government has turned the focus of his government to saving his own skin. It's utterly shameful. It is precisely because he cannot lead that it falls to others to do so. I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compare...
Sorry. Can I just calm it down? Quite rightly, I wanted to the Prime Minister. I expect the same of the Leader of the Opposition. Now, those who don't wish to hear, please, go and have a cup of tea or something. Kiss Stammer.
I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compare a perfectly legal takeaway while working to this catalogue of criminality looks even more ridiculous today. But, Mr. Speaker, if the police decide otherwise, I will do the decent thing and step down. The public need to know that not all politicians are the same. That not all politicians put themselves above their country. That honesty, integrity and accountability matter. Members on the opposite benches now also need to show leadership. This Prime Minister is steering the country in the wrong direction. They can hide in the back seat, eyes covered, praying for a miracle, or they can act. Stop this out-of-touch, out-of-control Prime Minister from driving Britain towards disaster. We waited for the Sue Gray report. The country can't wait any longer. The values symbolised by the door of number 10 must be restored. Members opposite must finally do their bit. They must tell the current inhabitant, their leader, that this has gone on too long. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And it's time to pack his bags. Only then can the government function again. Only then can the rot be carved out. Only then can we restore the dignity of that great office. and the democracy that it represents.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman talks about what went on in number 10 Downing Street and the events behind that black door, and the number of the events. And all I will say to him is that he, throughout the pandemic, was not leading many thousands of people in the fight against coronavirus. He was sniping from the sidelines and veering from one position to the next. And today, Mr. Speaker, he's done it again. Week after week, he could have come to this House and talked about the economy, about Ukraine, about the cost of living. No, Mr. Speaker, time after time, he chose to focus on this issue. He could have shown some common sense, Mr. Speaker, and recognised that when people are working very hard together, day in, day out, that it can be difficult to draw the boundary, Mr. Speaker, between work and socialising. And yet, after months of his, frankly, sanctimonious obsession, Mr. Speaker, the great gaseous zeppelin of his pomposity has been permanently punctured and irretrievably by the revelation that he is himself, he didn't mention this, he is himself under investigation by the police, Mr. Speaker, and yet, I'm not going to mince my words, I've got to say this, Sabir Korma, Mr. Speaker, is currently failing to hold himself to the same high standards that he demanded of me. It's true. He called for me to resign, Mr. Speaker, when the investigation began. Why is he in his place?
Mr. Holden, it's the second time. Please help me to help you, because I'm sure you want to hear the rest of it. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he should at least be consistent and hold himself to the same standards. He's still there, and so is the shadow deputy leader. And Mr. Speaker, I apologise when the revelations emerged. I continue to apologise. I repeat that I am humbled by what has happened, and we have instituted profound changes throughout number 10. But I think in view of the mess that he has found himself in himself, it would now be a sensible thing for him too to apologise, so that we can all collectively move on, Mr. Speaker. And that, I think, is what the people of this country want to see above all. They want to see leadership from this House of Commons, leadership from both parties, Mr. Speaker, in dealing with their priorities. And that is why we are focused on getting through the aftershocks of COVID. That's why I'm proud of what we did to roll out the fastest vaccine campaign in Europe. And that's why I'm proud that we now have the lowest unemployment anywhere in this country for 50 years, Mr. Speaker. That is what the people of this country want. I appreciate that he has his points to make, but I think overwhelmingly the will of this country is for us now to say thank you to Sue Gray, and for us collectively to move on.
Sir Robert Butland.
You, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend well knows the rules apply to him as much to all of us. And the rules of this House are clear that anybody who comes here and deliberately lies and misleads this House should leave their position, resign or apologise. My right honourable friend has been asked many times about specific incidents, specific events that Sue Gray has outlined. Has he on any occasion come to this House in response to specific questions about specific events and deliberately lied to us?
No, Mr. Speaker, for the reason I have given, that at the time that I spoke to this House, I believe that what I was doing was to attend work events, and with the exception of the event in the Cabinet room, that is a view that has been vindicated by the investigation.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I speak, the public is poring over the sordid details of what went on out of the public eye behind the high gates and the walls of the Prime Minister's residence, and the report is damning. It concludes, many gatherings and many individuals did not adhere to COVID guidance. Events were attended by leaders in government and should not have been allowed to happen. Junior civil servants believed their involvement was permitted by the attendance of senior leaders. There was an unacceptable lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff. And crucially, Mr. Speaker, the senior leadership at the centre, both political and official, must bear responsibility for this culture. That leadership came from the top. And the Prime Minister, in the words of the report, must bear responsibility for the culture. A fish rots from the head. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's dispatch box denial of a party taking place on the 13th of November is now proven to be untrue. He was there on the 13th of November, photographed, raising a toast, surrounded by gin, wine and other revellers. The charge of misleading Parliament is a resignation matter. Will the Prime Minister now finally resign? This Prime Minister has adopted a systematic, concerted and sinister pattern of evasion. Truthfulness, honesty and transparency do not enter his vocabulary. It is just not part of his way of being, and it speaks for the type of man that he is. Credibility, truth, morality all matter, and the Prime Minister has been found lacking time and time again. He can shake his head, but that's the reality, Prime Minister. Ethics have to be part of our public life, and ethical behaviour has to be at the core of the demeanour and the response of any Prime Minister. The Prime Minister brings shame on the office and has displayed contempt not only to the members of this House, but to every single person who followed the rules. They stayed away from family, those who missed funerals, those who lost someone they loved. So when the Tory members opposite retire to the 1922 committee this evening, I hope they will bear in mind the now infamous government advert featuring a desperately ill COVID patient. It said, "Look into her eyes and tell her you never bend the rules." If they don't submit a letter, if they don't remove this Prime Minister, how will they ever look at their constituents in the eye ever again?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the right honourable gentleman should look closely at her Sue Gray's report, and I repeat my thanks to her. I stress that the nature and length of my involvement in these events is very clear from what she says, and I take full responsibility for what happened, and that is why we've taken the steps that we have to reform and improve the way Number 10 works. We are humbled by what has happened, and we have changed it.
Peter Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since I've been elected to this House, I've been running a campaign called Listening to Wellingborough and Rushden. And you may recall on one occasion that group asked me to present a letter at PMQ calling for a previous Prime Minister to resign. What they're telling me today, Mr. Speaker, is their concerns are the terrible war in Ukraine, the illegal immigrants crossing the Channel, and the economy. And their message to the Prime Minister is to get on with the job. Does he agree with the Listening to Wellingborough and Rushden campaign?
I agree with it. I agree with them profoundly and passionately, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said that on the 13th of November 2020, the ABBA party he attended briefly, his defence was a job interview. Can he confirm he was only in his flat and he met Henry Newman to discuss a job? And can he confirm what the other special advisers were doing? Were they part of the job interview as well?
Mr. Speaker. That evening was extensively investigated, to the best of my knowledge, and I don't believe I can improve on what Sue Gray has had to say.
Tobias Elwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a damning report about the absence of leadership, focus and discipline in Number 10, the one place where you expect to find those attributes in abundance. I made my point and my position very clear to the Prime Minister. He does not have my support. But a question I humbly put to my colleagues is, are you willing, day in and day out, to defend this behaviour publicly? Can we continue to govern without distraction, given the erosion of the trust with the British people? And can we win the general election on this current trajectory? The question I place to the Prime Minister is now, Mr. Speaker, I'm being heckled by my own people. If we cannot work out what we're going to do, then the broad church of the Conservative Party will lose the next general election. But my question to the Prime Minister is very clear on the question of leadership. Can he think of any other Prime Minister who would have allowed such a culture of indiscipline to take place under their watch? And if it did, would they not have resigned?
Mr. Speaker, I think to answer the question that he put to all of us on these benches, I think the answer is overwhelmingly and emphatically yes, we are going to go on and win the next general election, because we're going to get on with the job, Mr. Speaker.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says he's sorry, but he's only sorry he got caught. He didn't care then, as he parted during lockdown, when people couldn't see their dying loved ones. He didn't care last year when he insisted that no rules had been broken. And he doesn't care now when families across our country are struggling to heat their homes, fill their cars and put food on the table, with a cost of living crisis that has only deepened while the Prime Minister has been scrambling to save his own skin. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister look the British people in the eye and name one person, just one person, he cares about more than himself?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell him that there are people in Number 10 Downing Street, including me, who cared passionately about making sure that we had the PPE that we needed, we had the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, and that we protected this country from COVID. And that is what people were doing. And I may say that the abuse that has been directed at civil servants and officials is, I think, wholly unwarranted.
Robert Gentry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I think of civil servants and advisors during that period, I think of the brilliant civil servants who helped move mountains to create the shielding programme within a matter of days. I think of the brilliant civil servants and advisors that got 90% of homeless people off the streets within days. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that these achievements and others should mean that nothing in this report is a stain upon the character of the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of civil servants, whether in Number 10, other government departments, or across the country, who helped steer this country through the pandemic? And secondly, difficult though this is to say for many, with a war in Europe, with an economic crisis, with the challenges this country faces, is it not really true that it is now time to turn a page, and for this country, our politics and this House to move forwards?
I agree with him absolutely passionately, Mr. Speaker. I think the best thing, I think we can study the report, we can draw the conclusions that we want. The best thing now for our country is to move forwards together, and that's what we're going to do.
Dame Angela Riddle.
Mr. Speaker, we all understand, and the Prime Minister understands, that not being truthful on the floor of this House requires a resignation. My honourable friend, the member for Hornsey and Wood Green, asked the Prime Minister a point-blank question on the floor of this House when he was at that dispatch box. She asked him if he had been to a party on the 13th of November in 10 Downing Street. He said he hadn't and that no party had happened. There are 4 pictures of it. There are 4 pictures of it, Mr. Speaker, featured in the Sugray report. Will the Prime Minister account now, on the floor of the House, for his answer to that very specific question?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, and I tried to do it in what I said earlier on. And the answer is that it's part of my job to say thank you to people who work in government. That's what I was doing. I believed it was a work event, and indeed there has been no fine issued to me as a result of my attendance at that event, because that is what I was doing.
Coutinho.
Mr. Speaker, I commend Sue Gray for the report, and I do understand why people are angry. Having looked at the pictures of the birthday party in the Cabinet Office, I think the opposition are going to be quite hard-pressed to explain why they have such moral outrage about that, but not about the late-night beers that happened just down there. However, one of the things I was very troubled by was the language that was used towards the custodian. Would the Prime Minister join with me now, and I'm sure the whole House would agree, the level of respect and gratitude that we have to every single cleaner and worker and all the people in the tea room that work in this place? Thank you, sir.
I thank her very, very much, and I agree very much with what she has just said. And I think that as I said in my opening statement, Mr. Speaker, I think the behaviour towards any rudeness towards a member of staff is absolutely inexcusable, and I want whoever was responsible to apologise.
Tamanji Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I feel as if I have completely let down those who showered me with so much love. Why wasn't I by the bedside of my lovely grandmother during her final few days? Why did I let her die alone in that hospital? Why did I not attend the funeral of my uncle because of worries about government restrictions on numbers? And why did I not go to comfort my brother-in-law's father as he was dying in a Slough care home? Why, with all of this context, it is utterly hypocritical for those individuals who were preaching to us ad nauseum about patriotism, the flag and the Queen, for those very people to then be having late-night parties, including 2 on the night before the Queen had to sit all alone during her husband's funeral when the country was in a state of national mourning. Absolutely shameless. So, Prime Minister, given that the Prime Minister is not going to do the right and honourable thing, does he agree with me that it is not the support and sympathy of the British people that is keeping him in power, the majority of whom want him to resign? It is the support and sympathy of those concerned...
Order! Order! I'm sorry, but it's meant to be a question, and also we don't normally bring monarch into proceedings. And I'm sure that the Prime Minister will have got the gist, and quite really, I understand the emotions behind it, but it's going to be short of Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry for the honourable gentleman's loss, and he has a perfect right to speak with the passion that he does. All I can say is that I take full responsibility for what happened. I do, and we have made extensive changes.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, I believe both leaders have a lot to answer for with regards to this issue. The British Army teaches you, or certainly believes at its very core, that you serve to lead and you lead by example. Given the extent of rule-breaking in Number 10, does my right honourable friend believe that what he has said to the House since about there being no rule-breaking passed the test of reasonableness?
I think he's asking exactly the right question, and I understand why he asks it. But I've tried to give my answer to him and to the House, which is that I believe that I was attending work events. Those are the ones of which I had knowledge, and with the exception of what took place in the Cabinet Room in June of 2020, that view has been sustained by the investigation.
Janet Charing.
Speaker, neither I nor my Edinburgh South West constituents would wish to live in a state where the government of the day could influence the police in the exercise of their duty to investigate without fear or favour. So we're puzzled as to why the Prime Minister didn't receive questionnaires in respect of 3 gatherings where other people in number 10 received questionnaires, and we're also puzzled as to why the ABBA party in the Prime Minister's flat has never been investigated either by Sue Gray or the Metropolitan Police. So can I ask the Prime Minister what can be done by way of an independent investigation to assure me and my constituents that the Metropolitan Police have not been nobbled?
Well, that would greatly surprise me, Mr. Speaker, but I think she should look more closely at Sue Gray's report, because I think she will find the answer she needs.
Michael Babrickan.
Mr. Speaker, I understand the outrage of people in Lichfield and Burntwood, and indeed the honourable gentleman opposite, who have lost loved ones. But I also understand, having been an employer, that attending an event where someone is leaving is considered to be a working event. And my right honourable friend clearly got guidance that turned out to be wrong. So can he now explain how the appointment of a new permanent secretary at number 10 will make a difference in the future?
I thank him very much, and what we're doing is not only the structure of number 10 has changed, so there's more direct command and control for the whole building, which was a little bit unclear before. And so there is a new permanent secretary with direct responsibility for the whole office, as it were, hundreds and hundreds of people, as opposed to that function being nominally to be addressed by the principal private secretary. And the lines of, as Sue Gray said, the lines of command were not clear. Sue Gray.
Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After months of shuffling around, prevarication and book passing, this report makes it absolutely clear that when the British public were taking those restrictions seriously, the Prime Minister was taking the British public for fools. That's why the Prime Minister and his government cannot now be taken seriously. Isn't it time he said goodbye so that the rest of us could say good riddance?
Mr. Speaker, I really don't think that the government can be blamed for the delay that he complains of. It took a long time for the Met to do their work. It was exhaustive, and I don't believe that it sustains the conclusion that he has drawn. Not at all.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I asked the Prime Minister about Sue Gray's interim findings on the 31st of January, he asked me to wait for the inquiry report. He asked many members that day to do the same thing. Subsequently, he has asked the media to wait for the findings of the report, and he knows that many colleagues on these benches have told their constituents they're waiting for the inquiry report. So I was very surprised to read in the Times the intimation that he may have asked Sue Gray not to publish the report at all. Is there any truth to that suggestion, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, what Sue Gray has published is entirely for Sue Gray, and it is a wholly independent report, Mr. Speaker.
Boris Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, the last time I asked the Prime Minister a question on this subject, I said the problem with him, and I've got on with him over the years, is he is a serial offender. And even serial offenders, if they actually confess that they've done wrong and then repent for what they've done, they can actually be forgiven because they're mending their ways. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but today's performance from the Prime Minister shows no real remorse, trying to shift the buck on other people, and I believe now, with all the many faces I see on the other side, that he should now resign.
Mr. Speaker, I've apologised, and I am, as I have said, deeply contrite about what happened. I take responsibility. We are affecting and have done a huge amount of change already in number 10, but it is my judgment that the best thing for the country is now to move on from this issue and to learn the lessons.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Given the cavalier way in which these rules were interpreted in number 10,
Does my right honourable friend agree that rules of such intrusiveness and rigidity must never again be imposed on the British people as a whole?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we were dealing with a pandemic that was absolutely unprecedented, and we did not have any immediate tools to control it short of a vaccine without asking people to restrict their behaviour. I'm sure there are plenty of lessons we can learn from the future about how to do it better, and I'm sure that will be a matter for the inquiry.
Angus Brendan MacNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. While he is still unwittingly a great asset for Scottish independence, the question everywhere, however, is how to goodness is he still Prime Minister of this current United Kingdom?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the answer to that question is contained in the continued support of the people of the United Kingdom for our union, and despite everything that they are doing to try to overturn the democratic verdict of 2014, I don't believe that they will succeed.
Natalie Elphick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his further apology and his explanation today, which is important for many of my constituents. Does he note paragraph 4 of page 36 of the Sue Gray report that says, there have been changes to the organisation and management of Downing Street and the Cabinet Office with the aim of creating clearer lines of leadership and accountability. And does he agree with her that these changes need to bed in and that the focus of our government must be laser-like in tackling the cost of living crisis that has come about as a result of the COVID pandemic and Ukraine, and that this is the concern over and above everything else of my constituents?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the General Opposite says answer, and I agree. I agree completely with what she has just said, and that's why we're going to get on with the job.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a load of baloney. Excuse after excuse after excuse, and it simply doesn't wash, and it won't wash with the British public, who are sick and tired of being taken for fools. The truth is, the Prime Minister encouraged the gatherings. He attended the gatherings. He poured the drinks at the gatherings. And he even raised a toast at the gatherings, so he knew perfectly well that these gatherings had taken place. And the most despicable thing of all is that Sue Gray says she saw multiple examples of a lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff because they knew what the rules meant, even if nobody else does. Does he show no contrition, no sense of shame that Downing Street under him has been a cesspit full of arrogant, entitled narcissists?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said to the House already, I think that it is absolutely disgraceful in any circumstances to be rude to people who are helping you, and rude to staff, rude to custodians. It's intolerable, and I will make sure that those who are guilty of it apologise or are otherwise disciplined.
Jack Brereton.
Mr. Speaker, now we've had this report and the Prime Minister has repeatedly apologised, does my right honourable friend not agree that we should be focusing on the real issues that matter to the British public, which is...
Sorry for one.
I apologise, Mr. Speaker.
Both of you, I think, need for a cup of tea outside because I can't hear with you both shouting. So a separate debate was trying to be created, but we don't need to worry anymore. Jack Barrett.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend not agree we should focus on the real issues that matter to the British people, dealing with the cost of living and also the issues with Russia's invasion of Ukraine? And given what happened in Durham, it's the only people left to apologise in this chamber are on those Labour benches, on the Labour front benches opposite.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think those people in glass houses should not throw stones.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
To call this a damning report for the Prime Minister is an understatement. It states the senior leadership at the centre, both political and official, must bear responsibility for this culture, both political and official. For 168 days, he's used Sue Gray as a human shield against this duty. In this farce of a parliamentary system, it's now all down to Tory MPs, and there are not many left here, for them to grow a backbone and oust this moral vacuum of a Prime Minister. Will he spare them the trouble and resign?
No, Mr. Speaker.
That would take honour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank Sue Gray for bringing this report to us today, and, of course, the Metropolitan Police for concluding their inquiries before that. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that investigations should be carried out without outside interference or statements towards the police or others? And would the Prime Minister now urge the Leader of the Opposition to respect this too with regards to Durham Constabulary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that sounds like very sound advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My mother, my father-in-law, and my mother-in-law are just 3 of the nearly 180,000 people who died from COVID-19 in Britain. The laws broken by the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and others were not victimless crimes. They were not silly rules and meaningless red tape. They were designed to protect lives. Mr. Speaker, the doctors and nurses who cared for my relatives at North Manchester General Hospital were not clocking off for Wine Time Friday. So for the first time in his life, will the Prime Minister do the right thing and resign?
No, Mr. Speaker, but I want to assure him that I understand the reasons why he feels as he does, but I also want to say that everybody in Number 10 took the pandemic with the utmost seriousness. I agree for his loss. We were doing our best to contain a very, very difficult situation.
Craig McKinley.
Speaker, my right honourable friend will be aware that I voted against much of this COVID legislation over the last couple of years because I felt a lot of it was pettifogging, ridiculous and unnecessary. I think an apology should be paid by this entire House to the British people to allow a lot of this nonsense legislation to be in place. Whereas I have great comfort and respect that the courts tend to come to the same conclusion for the same offences, it would seem that the legislation that we passed allowed an individual police force to come to different conclusions, and certainly different police forces. Because of the photos I've seen, I'd much rather have been at the curry and beer than the birthday party that the Prime Minister had in the Cabinet room.
I thank him very much, and all I can say is that those matters are for the relevant forces.
Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that the Prime Minister has any credibility left because my constituents tell me that they don't believe what he says. So I want to ask the Prime Minister about what I think to be the bare minimum in this situation. When it comes to the cleaning staff and the security staff in Number 10 treated with a lack of respect, has the Prime Minister personally apologised to them?
I thank her. This is the first that I've seen of the detailed criticisms of civil servants for that abuse. I've said that I think it's intolerable, and I will make sure that staff, custodians, cleaners who were treated disrespectfully get a proper apology. I've apologised to them today. I've apologised to them today already from this dispatch box.
Rarely in my 21 years in this House have I heard such utter drivel than what we've been presented to today. I've tried to find words to capture what the Prime Minister said. Disingenuous, delusional, slippery, self-serving, and I know I can't say dishonest in this place. No attempt at remorse, all somebody else's fault. Surely if he was half the man that he thinks he is, he would summon that self-respect and just go.
I direct him to what I've already said.
Barbara Keeler.
Speaker, I want to quote the following to the Prime Minister and all those on his side. We've just heard one who want to suggest the COVID rules didn't matter. It's from palliative care doctor, Dr. Rachel Clark. To NHS staff, it was abundantly clear that the way you survive a pandemic is together. In 2020, collective compliance was all NHS patients had to protect them. Basic, selfless public decency mattered. Rules were hated but obeyed because we care about each other. And that glass of wine in the PM's hand, it's been thrown in the face of all of us. How does he reply to that?
Mr. Speaker, I wish things could have been handled better, and I wish things we got things right in number 10 in the way that we didn't. And I apologise again for things that got wrong, but we've already changed the way we work, and I really think it's time that the country moved on.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has previously stated that Partygate investigations would be fully complied with, but today there are reports that senior staff simply didn't answer the questionnaires and as a result have avoided being fined. Can the Prime Minister therefore confirm whether all senior staff at number 10, including himself, met their obligations and replied to the Metropolitan Police in full?
As she knows, those are a matter for the Met.
Not sure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said, "I briefly attended such gatherings to thank them for their service, which I believe is one of the essential duties of leadership." He wouldn't need no leadership if it hit him in the face from where my constituents stand. And I'll tell him why. Because there's doctors who gave their lives. Their families weren't allowed to attend their funerals. I was on the phone when the trust I work with had to make decisions of leadership to separate people from not being able to see their dying relatives. I was on the phone to somebody whilst they died, begging me to let them see him. That's what leadership is, when those were difficult decisions they had to make, when nurses couldn't go home and had to book into hotels so they didn't spread infections. So if he had an ounce of leadership, he'd resign, so why doesn't he?
I refer her to what I've already said.
Nick Smith.
You're watching GB News with Gloria DiPiero and Liam Halligan.
Really interesting stuff, and you've got a theory about what's just happened.
Well, what struck me about the Tory benches, because what we were really interested in as observers of this is whether Conservative MPs were either going to attack or defend. And we wanted to see what the big figures were going to do. Theresa May, Steve Baker, David Davis, the movers and shakers. People like that were absent.
Yeah.
Theresa May left very early on the statement. Where are those people? That's what I would want to know. I suspect that's what the Prime Minister wants to know as well, because he would be... there's something eerie about what we just witnessed there.
We know there's a press conference coming up about 3:30. We know the 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers meets earlier this evening, I think about 5 o'clock. Yeah. And it sounds insular, but these are the important people, because these are the people who can remove the Prime Minister, right? They can... If 15% of those Tory MPs, I think it's 54, submit their letter of the Prime Minister should resign, there is a Tory leadership contest. We could get a new Prime Minister. And I must say, we've been watching this for 20, 25 minutes or so. The only two Tories of note that stood up, I think we're right in saying, were Tobias Ellwood, who's the chair of the Defence Select Committee. We know he's submitted his letter anyway, or we think he submitted his letter. He's certainly been speaking out against the Prime Minister. And there was one new kind of sceptical Tory, wasn't there? Robert Jenrick, the Community Secretary.
And shall we make a confession? There's also one other Conservative MP who neither of us could name. He was not asking a friendly question either.
Yeah.
But the nature of that statement... where were they?
Yeah.
Either to condemn or to support. There's my sense is there is a meeting going on somewhere in Westminster, and that should be a concern for the Prime Minister. It's a theory.
Well, let's put that to Darren McCaffrey, who's at Westminster, to get his reaction. What do you think of this theory, Darren? Gloria and I are wondering, where are the Tory big beasts?
Yeah, I think in many regards you're right about the backbenchers emptying, in a sense that you would have thought they'd either stay there to question the Prime Minister, given we've been told to wait for this report for months, by many of them, it must be said, as well. So they would either be there to support the Prime Minister or indeed to question him. I think in the end, and I got this real sense, I've just been sat in the press gallery for the last, nearly 2 hours, frankly. There's none of the kind of I don't want to say this excitement, but the free-will atmosphere we had a couple of months ago, when there was a real sense that the Prime Minister's job was in doubt, where there was real anger, even amongst Conservative MPs, about what was coming out in the press, the police were investigating. It does feel that kind of things have moved on to a large degree, and I think ultimately the reason that many of those Conservative backbenchers simply are not there is because they want to move on too. They feel pretty uncomfortable with lots of this. They don't like what they've read in Sue Gray's report today. They don't, frankly, necessarily like what the Prime Minister's had to say, but ultimately in the end they know he's not going to go anywhere. And so they just want to get away from it. They do want to draw a line under this and they do want to move on, not because they have wholesome support for the Prime Minister in this matter, but simply because they've had, frankly, enough. And I suspect that maybe some of them might be a bit more forthright during that 1922 committee of backbench MPs a bit later on. But aside from Tobias Ellwood and a few other MPs that put their head above the parapet, in the end, I think many of them are just consigned to the fact that the Prime Minister is going to survive this and they want to move on, they want to talk about other things, they don't want to be associated with it. And when you read, lots of the details that's come out, and I think it's important, Gloria and Liam, to reflect on some of this, it is pretty damaging, given the fact that Sue Gray lays lots of the blame at senior civil servants and indeed senior politicians such as the Prime Minister. We're talking about people staying to 4:30 in the morning, red wine spilt on walls, broken furniture, karaoke. There was a minor altercation, essentially a bit of a fight at one event, excessive boozing, a lack of respect, and we heard this brought up, didn't we, by many MPs, to security staff, to custodians of Number 10, who clearly felt that the rules were being broken, were telling people to stop and were frankly ignored or shouted down. And then with this email as well from Martin Reynolds, one of the people, the former private secretary to the Prime Minister, who in one email says we seem to have got away with it. Again, this sense that the people inside Number 10 knew they were breaking the rules. But ultimately, the Prime Minister's point is that he felt these were work events that he attended. He said the police had investigated. They'd found on most occasions he had not broken the law, and that all those things I've just talked about, they didn't happen when he was there. And that is his defence. And to be perfectly frank, there is a lot to be said for that defence. At the end of the day, the police have investigated all of this, or most of it at least, and they have found that he personally didn't break any of the rules. But it's fair to say that much of the stuff inside Number 10 was pretty despicable, when many people were frankly adhering to the rules and many people were making lots of sacrifices. I think one notable thing also, just to add, is Aaron Bell, who's not a supporter of the Prime Minister, he's a Conservative backbencher, specifically asked about this report in the Times earlier on this week, that the Prime Minister had asked Sue Gray not to publish her reports. Now, the Prime Minister, in his answer, he didn't deny that. Now, Number 10 have kind of somewhat denied it earlier on this week, but the Prime Minister didn't take that occasion to explicitly deny that he had called on Sue Gray privately not to publish a report. I suspect that's one of the things the Prime Minister will be asked about when he answers questions from us journalists in around 2 hours' time.
And the press conference that you talk about, actually, that will be designed to speak to the nation as well, because, of course, he's just addressed politicians so far. So what do we know about the timing of when he will do an on-camera apology to the nation?
Yes. So I think, Gloria, he's going to probably wrap up here in the next 30 minutes to an hour. He's then going to head back to Number 10 to have that press conference at 3:30. I suspect that probably lasts around an hour or so. And you're right, journalists obviously have different questions, sometimes from MPs, and I think there'll be lots more probing about that issue of whether he did ask Sue Gray not to publish that report. I think they'll be probing too about whether the police and Sue Gray have necessarily carried out the extensive investigation that we think they necessarily have. There are suggestions that actually the party that took place in the Downing Street flat, in which apparently ABBA songs were heard, was not really investigated by the police, or indeed by Sue Gray, because Sue Gray thought the police was investigating it. And then after that press conference, the Prime Minister is going to come back here to Parliament, where he's going to talk to Conservative MPs, and we'll have to see what the reaction of MPs is after that. But I think, again, in the grand scheme of things, I just don't think we are where we were in February and January time, when there was a real sense that we could get to those 54 letters. Yes, there's been damage to the Prime Minister. That is undoubtedly true. Yes, there are big questions about what went on in Number 10, how it was allowed to happen. But there is also a sense, I think, even among critics of the Prime Minister, that they do frankly want to move on from this. I've got Catherine West here, Labour MP. Remember, she was one of the people who asked that question about November 13th. She is here on Ab Green. I'm going to bring her in. We're going to turn around a little bit. What do you think what you had to hear from the Prime Minister today?
Well, I was very disappointed because he hasn't come clean about the 13th of November. Obviously, I asked him back in December about the year before, in November 2020, regarding what went on in Downing Street. And Sue Gray's report does not go into the detail. She deliberately says that she doesn't go into the detail. Rather than saying that, Mr. Johnson said just now, he's very clear that Sue Gray's report goes into all the detail and it's all clear from the 13th of November. And it's not at all.
But in saying that, I mean, we've had 2 investigations now. We've had Sue Gray's report, we've had the Metropolitan Police investigation. The Prime Minister has been fined, he's apologised. And there have been changes made inside Number 10. I mean, frankly, are you calling for more investigations?
The reason this matters is that the truth matters to the British people. In Parliament, let's put aside how he's running the government. Let's put aside our usual complaints as opposition members about the shambles that we feel is happening at actual running things level. Let's just think about our Parliament. Our Parliament is a very, very important institution. It's a bit like the courts or the police. It's an institution which defines us as a democracy. And if we cannot trust the leader to come to the House of Commons and to tell the truth, then that is corrupting our democracy. And that is the question. It's less about whether it was an ABBA party or whether it was a farewell or whether it was a job interview, who was there, how many advisors were there, what they had to drink, whether they left at 4 o'clock in the morning or what. What matters is when one comes into the House of Commons as an elected member, is one telling the truth?
Yeah, but ultimately that's going to be a decision the public will make. I mean, there are people out there who don't believe the Prime Minister. There are people out there who do believe the Prime Minister. That's going to be a decision for the public. Frankly, though, I would suggest that most people across the country are pretty bored about this story now. They don't like what went on, but they want to move on. They want to focus on the cost of living crisis. They want to focus on the big issues of the day.
People need to trust that when they go to the ballot box and they put an X next to someone's name, that person, when they represent them in the House of Commons, they are telling the truth. It doesn't matter what it's about, if it's cost of living, if it's about peace and war, if it's about a party that happened or didn't happen. It's about trust. We have to be able to trust our institutions, as I said before, our police, our courts, our Parliament. Parliament is too important an institution for us to accept. As members, we have to uphold that truth be told in the House of Commons.
I get that. Just my final question is, but what do you want to happen next? Because we've had 2 investigations. Are you now genuinely calling for more things to be investigated? When I put it to you, people's minds on Boris Johnson are already made up about whether they trust him or not. They will decide at the next election. Shouldn't the Labour Party, shouldn't all MPs now focus on the things that really matter?
He needs to set the record straight on what he just told me now. When I asked him about what happened on the 13th of November, he said it was all in the Sue Gray report. The truth is, the Sue Gray report specifically says it did not look into the ABBA party on the 13th of November. Why didn't he say that? He is a compulsive liar. It's a huge problem for our democracy that in the House of Commons the leader does not tell the truth.
OK. Catherine West, as always, thank you very much indeed. Labour's... Indeed, good to see you in the flesh. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Outside Parliament here, that's of course what the Labour Party would say. Many Conservative MPs feel that there's been a bit of witch hunt against the Prime Minister. He has apologised. Of course, it will be up to people at home to make their judgment calls on where they are. But in the end, Liam, and you're rightly pointing this out, frankly, in at least the immediate term, it's what Conservative backbenchers really make of all of this. They're going to be privately talking to the Prime Minister a little later on today. But I just fundamentally come back to this point is, do we think that Sue Gray's report has changed the dial in the mood within the party? I'm not entirely sure it has, and that means his job, at least for now, the Prime Minister's job, is almost certainly safe.
Thanks, Darren. Our political editor there, Darren McCaffrey, just outside Parliament. Let's turn now to political correspondent Tom Harwood, who's live for us outside Number 10. Tom, of course, there will be GB News viewers and listeners who are furious with the Prime Minister. We heard some MPs there talking about how they were adhering to rules during lockdown. They weren't able to give loved ones proper send-offs at funerals. Weddings were cancelled. A lot of people suffered greatly during lockdown. So there will be pockets of real anger across the country, not least among some Tory voters who will never vote for the party again until Boris Johnson is removed. But I think the big picture here, isn't it, that Sue Gray's report, for the most part, is pretty underwhelming.
You do start to get that sense, particularly when we've been told of all of the gory details of these so-called parties for the past 6 months or so, the drip effect of them popping out across the press, the sort of confused picture that you get of not knowing precisely who was at which one and what occurred, and was the Prime Minister the person who broke the swing or left at 4 a.m. or did karaoke in the basement. Well, now we have all of the details laid bare before us, and to some extent that you could argue, you could make a case that that helps the Prime Minister. There's a differentiation there between what junior staff got up to with the more raucous events and what the Prime Minister got up to with regard to rather glum photographs of him standing around the cabinet table or standing in a doorway addressing a group of individuals, albeit holding wine in their hands. No, it does seem like there has been the sort of air of mystery, the air of intrigue potentially burst by this report. Giving those details will allow people who are so inclined to see exactly what went on at each individual one and understand why some of them were deemed fixed penalty notice worthy by the Metropolitan Police and why others were not. It also does throw up some big questions for the leader of the opposition, of course, because the pictures of Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak and Cabinet Secretary Simon Case standing around that cabinet table holding some drinks and looking not like they're having the biggest bash in the world doesn't look a million miles away from that grainy picture of Sir Keir Starmer that we have become to know so well, of him drinking beer in Durham during a campaign event at a time when indoor mixing was banned. Indeed, the regulations were fairly similar on both the Boris cake event day and the Sir Keir Starmer beer event day. On both occasions, 6 people could gather outdoors, of course. On both occasions, non-essential retail had been reopened. On both occasions, indeed, individuals could visit legally dying loved ones in care homes, in hospitals, in hospices and in private residences. That had been the stage of lockdown easing both of those events met. And so the genuine question does arise. If the Prime Minister was fined for this event and now being able to see those photographs of it, might Sir Keir Starmer be in a little more trouble than people had thought? But of course, today was all about Parliament. Boris Johnson speaking to his own MPs, and it seems like he might have got over that hurdle. This afternoon, however, in a couple of hours' time, Boris Johnson addresses the nation, and that might be a significantly more difficult hurdle to overcome.
Tom Harwood, GBNews political correspondent at Downing Street for us. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is here. Hello, Mark. So today is all about the Sue Gray, the civil servant report. But actually, there's been a huge police investigation. That's now closed.
That's closed, and of course there are many who would like to see it reopened again. That's not going to happen. Right. The police, quite frankly, are glad to be shot of this. They did not want to investigate this in the first place. They had a policy of not retrospectively investigating potential COVID breaches, but because of the political furore over that, they were bounced into having to open an investigation. And they dedicated 12 officers 4 months investigating every potential angle, every person that was interviewed. Everybody, of course, at the moment, they're getting excited because they're seeing these photographs for the first time, just like they saw that photograph for the first time that ITV obtained the other evening. The police have had these photographs and witness statements for a very significant period of time. They have concluded, having spoken to everyone attending all of these different events, got their side of the story, looked at all of the evidence, including photographic evidence, that the number of fixed penalty notices is the number they're issuing. 126 fixed penalty notices served on 83 individuals. Now, some of those individuals have received between 2 and 5. Most have got 1 fixed penalty notice. like the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister's wife. Now, of course, what you have is pressure on the Met by those that are clearly not happy with the fact that the Prime Minister just received one fixed penalty notice to go and reinvestigate this in light of what they say is new evidence. As I say, it's not new evidence. It's all been considered in the round by the Met. So these people that clambered and called for the Met to investigate in the first place, well, they got what they wanted. They got a very detailed investigation. Now the results of that investigation are back. They're not happy, many of them, and want the police to reinvestigate. Well, it doesn't work that way. You wanted an investigation, you got it, very detailed, it's concluded. That's the way the Met would like it to stay.
Of course, it's a big step for politicians to accuse the police of not being, straight up and down in their investigations. I got a sense that some MPs stepped towards saying that, but then retreated. Also on the minds of lots of Labour MPs will be the fact that the Durham police are investigating their leader, Keir Starmer. Do you think that there's a sense now that Keir Starmer's going to get off relatively lightly?
Well, he's certainly in the spotlight, and we don't know, because this is an independent, completely different police force in terms of Durham Constabulary to the Metropolitan Police, and they will approach this on the evidence that they have. Again, they will speak to the 30 or so that we believe were in attendance at this particular event involving Keir Starmer. Those witness statements will be taken. Any photographic or video evidence will be taken as well, and they'll make their mind up as to whether there was indeed a breach and whether it should be in the form of some kind of a sanction, like a fixed penalty notice issued to Keir Starmer. So they may well do that. But you're right. I mean, if you're calling, as, say, a Labour MP, for the police to be much tougher in their approach,
to work both ways,
it can absolutely backfire on you, as perhaps Keir Starmer is feeling it has to an extent anyway. But as I say, the important thing is, for the Metropolitan Police investigation, as far as they're concerned, it's over, it's done with, and they hope now that Sue Gray's report is finally out, that the political furore over this will die down as well.
Mark White, GBNews Home and Security Editor, thanks a lot for that. Well, Gloria's sadly leaving me now, but don't fear, because Alex Phillips will be joining me next. Lots more to come. But now it's time for the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a cool and cloudy day so far, and we keep a keen breeze during the rest of the day with further showers, but there will be some brighter spells making an appearance later, particularly towards the northwest as a weather front drifts through. And the isobars at the moment fairly tightly packed and seasonably breezy for May, and that's making it feel cool out there. But at least the more persistent rain eases during the rest of the day. The cloud breaks up. Clear spells as we go through the first part of the night, particularly towards Scotland, northern and eastern England, eastern parts of Wales as well. However, by the end of the night, well, further rain arrives into Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. 9 to 11 Celsius here, 12 in the south, 7 or 8 for northern Scotland, where we keep showers going through much of the night, along with a blustery breeze. But it's a damp start for Northern Ireland, for southern and central Scotland, and then the rain sinks into northern England, North Wales, where it will be heavy at times. Eventually, this feature weakens, so it's light and patchy rain for many by the end of the afternoon. And really, it's affecting central parts, drier and brighter to the south, 22 Celsius in London, and staying windy in the north.